And while she's doing that, hello everyone, Myron Wingfield. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am on staff with the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry and have been at that for a year. And as we begin, I wanted to take a moment of personal privilege to say a word of thanks to all of you for the work you do in service of helping the larger body discern the calling of those who sense that they are called to ministry. And I particularly want to say a word of thanks to our Scott Sullender, who is one among you here today. He'll be on the panel tonight. The way I got to know Scott, first of all, was 25 years ago in his capacity as the one who was charged with doing the assessment for all those persons who were then pursuing probationary membership in the California Pacific Annual Conference. I was one of those. And I sat down with Scott after I'd done all of my assessment interview and tests and all that, and he said, well, Myron, I don't know what your board is going to do with the results of this, but according to this information, if you're not going to be a minister, you should be a maid. And suddenly many things became clear to me. About the same time that I was discerning my call to my vocation and as an elder in the United Methodist Church, I also was serving as my first appointment as a local pastor in Charlottesville District of Virginia Annual Conference. And I was living alone out in a rural area that had one stoplight that was in front of the county fire department. It only came on if there was a fire. And I had to learn to cook for myself if I was going to eat as well as I did when I was living at home with my folks. So I learned to cook and to love cooking. And when Scott told me that, I said, I do have that domestic bent. And it's helped me to embrace my avocation over all these years. So Scott, thank you. Yep, that's it. I can use that. Perfect. Okay, perfect. I'm going to put it back up here. Got it. All right, thank you for your patience. As Vic has already pointed out, the working name that we're giving to this process is Advancing Ministry Effectiveness Through Covenant Building. And the short form of that is ADEMIC. One of our first tasks that we're working on is finding a new name. Because as you may have already observed, it's awfully close to anemic or endemic or epidemic, and we don't want any of those. So we're looking to find a new one. One of the people who participated in the Pilot 2.0 introduction suggested we call it TREE. Trust building really elicits effectiveness, and you'll hear more about why he thought of that. But we have embarked on I'm hitting the space bar and it's not moving, so. The arrow. That's not doing it either. Thank you. I wanted to make sure I said a word of thanks to Meg Lassier before I proceeded, because Meg is the person who's been working with this at GBHEM long before I arrived on the scene, and she has been very helpful and graceful in ushering me into this new role and to passing this task on to me. And we have found in the past several months that we really are still going to be collaborators on this effort, because my primary portfolio works with district superintendents and those in areas of supervision, while her primary areas with boards of ordained ministry. And one of the motivations for coming up with this assessment process is the fact that the United Methodist Book of Discipline, paragraph 350.1, says that annually the clergy will be assessed by the district superintendent according to criteria that have been developed by the cabinet and the board of ordained ministry. So there's a disciplinary requirement for the two bodies in each annual conference to work together and to come up with an agreed upon set of criteria by which to measure clergy effectiveness. So that's one of the motivations for our developing this tool. I also want to say thanks to the 5 annual conferences that are currently participating in the Pilot 2.0. Some of those representatives are here in the group this weekend. Southwest Texas Annual Conference is the one annual conference that also participated in the first pilot, and the North Georgia Annual Conference, West Virginia, Illinois Great Rivers, and the Rocky Mountain Annual Conference, each representing one from each of the 5 U.S. jurisdictions. So any of those people that are here, raise your hands and be recognized, and let us say thanks to you for your role in that. Thanks a lot. What we're going to cover is, actually I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the development of the KSAPS tool because Vic's done a wonderful job of that, but on that and the research, but about how we have, through the first pilot and now in the second pilot, taken that tool and put it in the context of a process of covenant building. And then also talk about our plans for completing that pilot and making the tool available to the entire denomination. These are the points of research that Vic has already beautifully covered, so I'm going to zip through those. And to say that one of the first things that we learned from the first pilot is that one of the first pushbacks that we got from participants was the fear that a tool like this, any tool like this, would be used as a bat to beat up the clergy. And that it really need to be presented in a way that would help it to serve the purpose we all want, which is to develop the capacity of the clergy and to give an honest assessment of the effectiveness of their work. The other thing that we observed is that we really think we're going the wrong direction when we focus just on clergy effectiveness, because it denies the fact that, as we've discussed over the day today, that clergy are part of a system. They're part of a community. And the way that community is functioning is not just the clergy in the congregation, but I also think it's the surrounding body of the denomination, at least for United Methodist, and the system of oversight and watching over one another in love that should be provided by district superintendents and Episcopal leaders. And so that's why we have very intentionally called it ministry effectiveness, a covenant building process toward developing ministry effectiveness. And the covenant building process relies very heavily on the little book written by Gwen Purushotham titled Watching Over One Another in Love, a model for covenant building and supportive ministry. And we strongly encourage everyone using the process to start by reading that book, to provide themselves with an understanding of what we mean when we say covenant building. We have found that this process fosters an environment of healthy conversation rather than an environment of annual review in the terms that many of the lay people experience that in their workplaces, of sitting down and having an annual assessment of their work. And then also it fosters an environment of support and growth, mutual support and growth between the clergy and the Staff Parish Relations Committee as the key leaders of the congregation. And that it fosters, when it's lived into most thoroughly, it fosters a process that cultivates mutual accountability, not just among or between the clergy and the congregation, but also it involves the DS and the conference leadership as well. So what we learned from the first pilot in rolling this out with a different set of 5 conferences was that if the Episcopal leadership and the superintendents aren't bought into it and committed to it, then it's not going to take flight. It really does have to be a collective ownership of the process, and the more we look at it, we find that the stronger the program will be when there's a similar sort of covenant building process at each level of conference leadership, starting with Episcopal leadership and superintendency. And there's a paragraph in the back of Gwen's book where she imagines what if in each conference we did have bishops who made covenants with their Episcopal committees, and that covenant was made transparent for the whole conference. And what if each district superintendent was required to create a covenant with his or her bishop and superintendency committee, and that was made known, that covenant was made known to all the clergy under that DS's care. Then there would be more of a culture of accountability where everybody was being assessed about the effectiveness of their ministry. And there would be a sense that this really is a more fair process. And so we strongly encourage that it start at that level as a way of ushering the clergy and the congregations into doing the same thing. Matt Bloom wrote a wonderful little article titled "The Lost Art of Accountability," and the gist of his article is just that unless the leadership first owns in a proactive way accountability for himself or herself, then it's going to be hard to cultivate that accountability at every other level of the organization. We also found that the process is highly relational. It's very helpful to have that technical tool that does the assessment, but unless that tool is interpreted and, well, first of all, completed, the online assessment, until it's completed and then interpreted in the context of a relationship of trust and mutual support, then it's very easy for it to go south and for it to become a tool that can wound instead of build up. And then finally, that it does tend to cultivate an atmosphere of mutual accountability when it's well presented. We also think that the advantage of using this process over time are that it is founded in the most comprehensive research, as Vic has laid out beautifully. It's also rooted in research and best practices that are more widespread than just within the church. It does engender a sense of fairness among the clergy. It reduces both the halo error, that is, giving greater support than that is warranted, but it also helps to eliminate the horn error of demonizing or putting people down, piling on, as the case may be. It does provide a continuity of knowledge and observation for clergy, and especially I love the way that the Virginia Conference is proposing that it be used at every stage of clergy formation and then clergy life and living into the covenant. If it works the way we anticipate it will, a clergy and congregation leadership will be able to see what they are doing together over time and be able to assess their collective effectiveness for ministry. And we also think it will help us to use the appointment system better because there will be a growing body of knowledge to see in what environments have clergy proven to be most effective and what they may be best suited for in their progression of appointments. We also think it just leads to good goal setting for annual conferences, or I'm sorry, for congregations, because that's one of the prerequisites of the covenant, is that the leaders sit down and talk about their shared priorities for ministry. What are the goals they've already set for what they want to accomplish through their life, mission, and ministry? There are a multitude of additional uses. I've referred to some of them already, of matching pastors and congregation and a criterion for predictive measures. That is to sort of figure out what sort of patterns of behavior and leadership different leaders may provide. It also provides a roadmap for ministry effectiveness for both the clergy and the congregation. And it supports a trajectory mapping. In other words, it helps to ask the question or answer the question, is it the pastor's potential that we're looking at here, the congregation's potential, or is it some combined effect of how they're working together? The next steps are that we are implementing Pilot 2.0 this year. We started in January, and those 5 conferences that I named earlier are now in the process of rolling this out as a tool for their annual conference this year. And I'm going to pause just a minute and say a brief word about that, how the tool actually works. They're using all the criteria and the 13 KSAPs and what's the other, the task clusters, thank you. Drawing a blank all of a sudden. Task clusters, there is an online survey that has been created. It's very user-friendly. We've tested it and gone through it several times. We've refined it. The first time around, it was way too complicated, took way too long, especially for those people who were not particularly tech savvy. We've also created a paper version for those people who are computer averse, and a way for that same assessment to be done by even someone who is sight impaired. They could work with someone to complete it and then feed the information into the online program. And it starts with each pastor doing his or her own self-assessment. And as they do that, they enter the names of the Staff Parish Relations Committee, as few as 5 and as many as 12, many as 11 staff, all the 9 staff parish plus the lay leader plus the member of annual conference. And they can all then go online and do an assessment. It's all transparent so that once it's completed, the pastor knows who said what about him or her. And then once those 2 steps are completed, the district superintendent can also do his or her own assessment. And all those come together in a computer-generated report that the participants then print out and bring with them to a covenant-building meeting. Before they've done any of those steps, they have gone through a training where they learn about this whole process. They have read about the nature of covenant building. They've read the guidelines for a healthy conversation about that, the do's and don'ts about how we talk about our ministry together and how we're going to move ahead through this process. Then they come together, and there is a step-by-step, page-by-page guide for walking them through interpreting that tool. And then Richard Hunt put it beautifully earlier today when I was talking to him, then setting that aside and talking about how that fits into their vision for their ministry, what the pastor's strengths are, and how they're going to help support the pastor in using those strengths in pursuit of the mission and ministry of that congregation. And then also the potential weaknesses or liabilities and those things that probably won't get done so well by the pastor, and therefore who among us as leaders of the congregation is going to pick these up to make sure that they get done. And if not somebody around this table, who will we call upon in this body to make sure that this part is tended to? So there's written down names and behaviors that everybody involved covenants to in support of the ministries of the congregation. So the pastor's assessment takes place within that mix and is interpreted in that mix. And once all that's set in, the pastor feeds the results of that meeting back into the online program. The DS can read it all, and then the DS is obliged to say what he or she is going to do in support of that particular congregation's ministry covenant, to support it. So it does lead toward building up and developing the full capacity of both the clergy and the congregation in their shared ministry. We are going to continue through this pilot to refine both the tool and the process, including the details of the data management system and the program reports to make sure that they are continue to be consistent and produce the sort of results we want. And then we do hope to make this available starting January 1, 2015 to the entire denomination. The timeline for wrapping this up is the 15th of November of this year, but along the way, on a quarterly basis or more frequently, we're going to track the progress of each of these 5 annual conferences and refine the process and the tool as we go, using the feedback that we get from them as they go. And we do believe that it will be available for use and implementation by January of 2015. And with that, I'll wrap it up and ask you if you have any questions.